Welcome back to Power CEOs. If you are just tuning in, you're going to want to go to nowmedia.tv, click on Power CEOs and get your first half of this show because it's been pure gold. You're not going to want to miss a moment of it. And we are going to switch gears and dive into our AI moment of the week with our guest expert, Dr. Alan Badeau. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Jen. It is great to be here.
Okay, let's talk ethics, navigating all the risks and responsibilities associated with AI. In today's digital landscape, ethical considerations are in everybody's mind. They're essential. Talk to me about the main risks that businesses face regarding AI.
Well, the first piece is, quite honestly, it's just screwing up you've put so much into it. You've put your customer information into it. You put your customer data into it, and you have forgotten that, you need to secure it. You need to do a whole bunch of other things to it. And there's some sort of leak, or there is some sort of response that the AI gives that is completely inappropriate, that nobody ever planned for. Ethics, you've got to look at it really from, attack vectors from a cybersecurity perspective. How is it going to go bad? How can it go bad? When it does go bad, how are you going to respond to it? It's all of those little pieces that you have to plan for to make sure that you understand, one, what are the ramifications of that? Two, what is the risk that you are willing to accept from an ethical perspective? Because that will help drive your strategy, and that'll help drive your deployment strategy. And then three, just making sure that you understand, I say this all the time, but you understand what the AI should do and what it should not do. And, that's where that line has to be drawn to make sure that you are not overstepping from an ethical perspective or from really from a customer experience perspective. I'm going to steal your line, Jen, because I've heard you say very similar things. It takes years to build relationships with customers, and it only takes one response from an AI to kill it. And ethics is the primary and the easiest way that you can kill it.
I'm hearing this, and what I immediately go to is this is about crisis management before we even put something in.
Yes.
So it's about understanding all the potential downfalls and risks and having a crisis management plan for like we talk about contingency plan, but really this is a reputational. It's like a PR meets a contingency plan.
That's right.
That we need in place. So, there's a lot of things in AI from an ethical concern. A lot of people are concerned about bias, lack of transparency, accountability gaps. Can you talk to me a little bit about bias in AI? Because you and I have had this conversation, and yes, it depends on what's in the data and all of these things, and there are dangers there, but maybe we want to train certain biases in, for example, from a sales standpoint.
Yes.
So can you talk to me a little bit about the ethical issues surrounding bias?
Yeah. So the primary thing is that everybody, bias is supposed to be a bad word from an AI perspective. We want to train the bias out of it, or we want it to be completely unbiased. We want it to do this and this, and if it has bias, it's unethical. Well, we've got to slow roll that a little bit. Let's take a step back and let's say, what, if we want the AI to make a decision for a human that then the human can look at, if you take all of the bias out, fundamentally you're taking out a lot of data. And the accuracy of that response really needs to come into question. And so what is really more important is to work with vendors or work with a tool set and work with a data set where you understand and the bias is transparent to what the user is. Because at the end of the day, if and the more accurate and more information you have around the transparency piece, the better off that you're going to be anyway. But from an ethical standpoint, as you understand the model, what its capabilities are, and the inherent bias that every single large language model has, then that's the only way that you're going to be able to move forward. And in some cases, bias is important for AI, especially when you want to evaluate a product, you want to try to figure out what service maybe potential that you want to launch, and you're trying to use AI to say whether or not that's going to be accepted by your users, or not. Those pieces of bias are really the fundamental reason why you're going to get a good answer. And so, bias isn't always bad. It can be, really productive. It can be extraordinarily helpful as long as you understand that that's how it's been shaped. That's what it's supposed to do. And those are, there are certain types of answers that you should get from that. You need to embrace it for those situations. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, and an immediate thought that comes to my mind is on our board. We don't want an entire board who are yes people. And if we train all bias out, we don't get that different perspective. So I immediately go to, oh, if we train a model as a CFO to think like a CFO, they're going to be exceptionally conservative. They're going to focus on the bottom line. That's going to be their number one top decision-making factor, as opposed to a CEO who's going to be looking at strategic vision and how I'm going to drive this forward, as opposed to a CTO who's going to look at, well, what is the technical aspect? So in this case, as long as we're transparent with what bias is and what the utilization is and why we're utilizing it, it's okay. But what we have to also understand is, if an AI system or an LLM is trained on public data and it's intrinsically biased, it could make decisions that harm different groups of people. So I think this is about an awareness and a very focused utilization according to use case.
That's exactly right. And that's where people will tend to miss the boat on the bias piece, because they are trying to lump all bias together, and it shouldn't be. Just like all AI models are not the same, all bias is not the same either. And if folks take a step back, realize that bias is not always a bad thing, then looking at the big picture and how they can use it is going to be important.
So let me ask you a follow-up question to this, because I'm really curious. How often, once we integrate something, whether we've trained biased in or we are working with an inherent bias because it's an LLM model or whatnot, and we want those diverse perspectives in the development process, how often should we be auditing this, and what does auditing the result look like so that we can make sure that it aligns with our ethical standards or what we're trying to utilize the AI models for?
Yeah, and that goes to the heart of really the bias discussion, quite honestly, and how you're going to use it. Because there are often times when an enterprise is trying to use the AI, but they don't understand the boundaries. They don't understand how you can break it. They don't understand when the AI might give a potential negative answer, negative response that you don't anticipate, because they're not trying to do that. And so, one of the things that I do on any model when I would beta test, whether it was, an OpenAI model, a Claude model, a Falcon, whatever that is, I would quite frankly start asking it, negative questions. Try to get it to swear at me, try to get it to say inappropriate answers. I would try to, generate a, some sort of script where I can get it to pretty much say whatever I want it to say. And I've got some of those where I can turn those models into that. Because the important thing around that is if you don't know where those boundaries are, then there's no way that you can ever predict when that's going to happen. And that's awful if you're using it for a customer or a service desk that interacts with a customer, because they may have some sort of response and it's harmless, but it could still trigger. We could have a trigger warning with the AI where it starts to respond inappropriately. And that's because, we make the assumption that these large language models have so much data that, it's all going to average out. The great responses are going to be on this side. The bad responses are going to be on the opposite side. And then they will average out and cancel each other. And, you've got an unbiased model. Well, it doesn't work that way. It's not even close. It's not even close. Every single model has some sort of bias in it. You have to understand where that bias is and how you mitigate the risk when you deploy that. And when you can do that, that's when you're going to, that's the best way to alleviate the risk.
Yeah, I immediately think I'm laughing because I have an internal LLM that's trained only on my own data, not external sources. And it's snarky because I'm a coach. And if somebody asks the question twice, it'll say, look, you already asked that. What's the matter? You didn't do your action steps? Like, do not press go. Do not move forward until you do this. But I say that. So it's literally trained to answer as if I am, and I'm not a fluff coach. I'm a Kick you in the butt, coach.
That's right. Well, and the thing is too, Jen, if you think about that, we want the AI to be empathetic. We want the AI to, show emotion when we're asking it questions. We want it to recognize that. But then we say, oh, it can't have any bias. Well, fundamentally, that just doesn't make any sense to me. It just, that's not going to work. We don't want the AI to be robotic. Very different robotic versus bias. Okay. And so the more that we can understand it, not necessarily control it, but understand it, the better our interaction is going to be with the AI, and the better the AI is going to get over the long run. And that's what we're trying to do. Because if you want emotional responses, you want it to recognize those kind of things, you cannot train the bias out of it. Otherwise, it's not going to do that.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. It's all about how do we minimize the risk and build a more equitable system that achieves the goals that we're hoping to achieve with transparency and really auditing and understanding our results. Thank you so much for being here. How can folks reach out to you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, alanbadeau.ai, or they can find me on LinkedIn, or they can tune in on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. and on Now Media Network and watch AI Today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your expertise. And you, yes, you, it is time to talk about AI in your company. Form your plan, understand where you are, because this technology is not going away, but we will. Just for a few moments, we'll be back after these short moments.